Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to Merryn Talks Your Money, the personal finance edition of Merryn Talks Money. In these bonus podcasts, we talk about the best strategies for making the most of your money. I'm Merryn Somerset Webb, and with me, senior reporter and money distilled author John Stepek. Hi, John.
Hi, Merryn.
So this week, we're answering a question from James. James asked,
should I attempt to pay my child's university fees and living costs, assuming I can just about afford to do so? Or do I encourage my child to max out the available student loans and only make repayments when absolutely necessary?
Right. John, we've talked about this a lot in the past, and there is no straightforward answer. But let's start by just explaining how this system works, because it has recently changed. So how does it work now?
Well, I mean, you have to check what type of student loan you're on, and the types of student loans are all different between England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. But I think for this, particularly because James is from England, we'll just assume that his kid is starting uni this year, and that means they're going into the Plan 5 student loan. And what the main difference there is that while the interest rate is lower, so it's just RPI.
And it used to be RPI plus 3 percentage points. Now it's RPI.
Yeah. But the previous loan was written off after 30 years, and this one isn't written off for 40 years. So, and also...
that's your whole working life.
That's your whole working
pretty much
life.
no way
Right.
You're not going to be paying that back at the end of your working
Exactly. Unless you never earn more than £25,000 a year. And actually the starting rate has gone down as well from the previous loan. The previous loan was about £27,000 you had to earn before you had to start paying it back. But basically once you start earning £25,000 a year, you pay it off at a rate of 9% on top of your marginal income tax rate. So basically, this is much closer to a graduate tax than any previous type of student loan has been. And so, yeah, if you have an average graduate, then they will likely be paying 9 percentage points on top of their income tax rate for most of their working life to pay this off.
Okay, so one of the things that we should look at right away is how much you can borrow. Right, so the average amount that people borrow, pretty much everyone can. Well, I think everyone can borrow their fees, which is £9,250 a year. Right.
Yep.
And then depending on your academic year and where you're at university, you get a certain amount for a maintenance loan. And there's a maximum for that if you're living away from your parents outside London, which is the majority of people, I would say. The maximum is £9,978 a year. But that is means tested based on your parents' income. Yeah. So if your parents' income is, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's somewhere between £60,000 and £70,000.
Yeah, it's about 60 odds. And it does vary depending on whether you're in London or out of London or living with your parents or not. But yeah. And
so if you can only get the minimum, it's just over £4,700. So for an awful lot of people, they're going to be looking at that and going, well, it's absolutely nowhere near enough to cover my living expenses. So even if you get your full student loan, you're still going to find yourself having to look elsewhere for money, having to work all the way through the holidays, etc., if you're self-financing. So for a parent like James, even before we get to should I pay tuition, should I pay this $4,700 a year for my child, they're actually going to be contributing quite a lot already. Yeah, I think if you want to pay all of the costs, including the stuff that you can borrow money for, you're looking at a minimum of 20 grand a year from your post-tax income. Yeah, minimum. And that really is a minimum because, my own kids have sort of just started uni, and I would say that they're pretty sensible and they also work themselves. I would say that probably their living costs on an annual basis are between 10 and 12 grand a year. That's including rent, that's including, fun. You need to think about putting that away for them as well as the $9,250 a year in student fees. So yeah, let's call it between 20 and 25 grand depending on exactly where they're living and how much they work themselves, basically. Yeah. So the question then, or if you're going to look at it in purely financial terms, the question is, do you think you will make enough money over a lifetime such that you will end up owing the state money, hooray, you won, or you'll end up paying the whole lot off? And that's the bit that you simply can't know, because you've no idea how much you're going to earn over a career there. I've got some numbers from AJ Bell that show that if you start on a starting salary of about £30,000, which gradually increases over 40 years with inflation, a little bit extra for doing well, etc.,
that would mean you'll end up repaying a tiny bit less than you borrowed. So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But anything above that, it doesn't so much make sense.
Well, I suppose the other thing is, I think it's easy to get stuck on the idea because even if you have these figures, you just don't know what your kids are going to earn. You don't know if they might end up taking career breaks. You don't know if they might end up marrying a rich husband or wife and not having to work at all. And so, there are lots of things that can happen. So I think the main thing you have to think about is assuming you can even afford this in the first place, which is something else we should talk about. But you want to preserve the optionality as much as you can in this case, which is one reason why I think, even if you have this money to spare, why not stick 25 grand in a bank account, lock in the interest rate each year, because now you're going to get an interest rate that beats RPI.
Tax, John, tax.
Oh, yeah, I know. Tax is
that interest is taxed. So you might put it in a bank account, get more than RPI by 1 percentage point or so, but you're still going to lose it in tax. So that doesn't quite work.
You can I don't know, with inflation where it is now, especially RPI right now is under 2%. RPI is weirdly lower than CPI.
Yeah.
If you could lock in a 5% interest rate, which you probably can at the moment, then you're still going to keep up with the loan in real terms. Or you could go for a small coupon gilt. That's a wee bit, I know that's a bit fiddly to do.
That's possible. And then you don't have that problem. Okay, but that just takes care of the providing optionality during the university period when you keep it in cash. And the other question is, what are the other things that you could do with that money? And we always say, don't we, that one of the greatest things a parent can do for a child, the greatest gift you can give your child is your own financial security. Don't be going to them looking for money when you're old, right?
Yeah.
So if you can take that money and over 3 years, we're talking 60 grand plus, say 70 if you've paid it all. If you were to put that 70 off against your mortgage or into your ISA, into your SIP, or indeed into a SIP for your own children, or you can't put that much into a SIP for your children, but some, etc. Would that be more valuable to you than this confusing, dicey, difficult to quantify paying for your children instead of leaving them with student loans?
Yeah, and I mean, the other point about tax that you were just making there, I mean, they can stick $4,000 a year into a lifetime ISA. Now, all right, your kids then do own that, that's their money. So you have given it to them. But again, you put $4,000 into a lifetime ISA, that gets instantly raised to $5,000.
Yeah.
So I do think there's sensible things to do rather than, basically, I think there's a case to be said for always taking the loans and using other ways to offset against the loans and then considering what to do whenever they graduate.
Yeah. The only thing I would say about that, think about it after they've graduated to see how it works out, etc. But I look at the amount of tax that our young people pay, and I add the student loan to that, and this is something that we never had to experience. So let's say you go into your first job and you're earning in the high 20s. Well done you, by the way. You're paying your 20%, you're paying your national insurance, then you're paying this 9 percentage points, and then you probably are, and we'll get to this in another podcast, but you should be paying a 3% pension. Now, your effective marginal rate of tax in your first job is well over 40%.
Yeah, and that is
Can you save your children from that? Are you rich enough to save your children from that?
You have to have quite a lot of money to save your kids from that. And I mean, psychologically, it's a lot of ballast. And also, one thing we haven't touched on, but although this doesn't affect your credit worthiness and your credit rating, obviously it affects the amount you can actually borrow for a mortgage or pay for rent, because you're getting charged an extra 9% on top of your tax rate. So if you have the wherewithal to pay it off, then you can argue about the mechanics of paying it off, but it's probably worth doing. It just boils down to that risky whether it ends up being, actually that was a waste of money, because I wouldn't have had to pay it off, because for some reason they don't earn as much as you expect them to earn over their lifetime. But I do think the psychological element is important. But again, the other thing I would say is, maybe they would rather that you did have that. If you had £75,000 saved over the course of the university career, maybe they'd rather put down a deposit on a house with that money and kind of stomach the 9% penalty.
Yeah, look at you wanting to give the young choices.
I think it's a really tricky one. I mean, I don't know.
There's one more thing we should say before we close this, which is that I don't think enough students take advantage of the other types of finance on offer. So there are loads of scholarships on offer. There are lots of bursaries on offer. And the other thing that I think people don't know quite enough about is the grant system. There are too many charities in the UK, way too many charities doing too many things. Down. And that's another podcast. We will come to it again. But nonetheless, those charities exist. They offer all kinds of grants. So you can go to your university, if you're particularly good at any sport, if you're particularly academic, if there's all sorts of things. There's a list on the Uni Guide website. If you're from a particular area or country, if you're the first person in your family to go to university, you're passionate about a certain industry, whatever it is, there are all sorts of reasons you might be able to get a grant or a scholarship or a bursary from your university. And then there is a brilliant website that I was having a quick look at earlier called Turn to Us. It's also worth noting that the government gives grants to people in various things. So social workers, doctors, dentists, if you're studying for any of those, you may be able to get a government grant. And there are websites that will help you look for grants for all sorts of other things as well. So that is definitely worth doing.
Basically, this has made the cost of uni much more pertinent and salient in people's minds. And I think it is worth considering, is this actually the best route? If you already have a strong idea of what you want to do, then maybe an apprenticeship is better. I was looking at apprenticeships recently, and if you want to be an accountant, for example, and some people do, then you can get very good accountancy apprenticeships. You just, you're doing, basically it's like getting paid to go to uni. And by the time you're done, then you're far ahead of the actual graduates because you've worked at the company, maybe it's Ernst & Young, something like that. And you've been there for long enough that you're already embedded and you're managing people your age who are just coming out of uni. So I do think that if you've got a firm idea of what you want to do and you're not worried about being somewhat locked into a career path, then an apprenticeship is a very good option potentially.
Although you may be prepared to miss out on the parties.
Honestly, how many parties can you go to whenever you get this amount of student debt hanging over you? And this is why young people today are so much more sober than we were.
Can't afford anything.
Can't afford
No, I agree. This is another podcast altogether, but I do think that having the student debt and the pension payments hanging over them is something that is having a major effect on younger people today. But that's another podcast. Yes. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
So as you can tell from our discussion, there is no actual answer here. It depends on your own personal financial situation. It depends on your priorities. It depends on the degree your child is doing. It depends on their job prospects later. There's an awful lot of things to bring into consideration here. We can't give you an absolute answer, but I hope that we've pointed you towards some of the things you should think about. Thanks for listening to this week's Merryn Talks Your Money. Be sure to rate, review and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also be sure to follow me and John on X or Twitter at MerrynSW for me and at John_Stepek for John. And keep sending questions or comments to merrynmoney@bloomberg.net. This episode was hosted by me, Merryn Somerset Webb and John Stepek. It was produced by Summer Saudi and Isabella Ward. Production support and sound design by Moses and